Gonna see if I can get through some more of these scraps and maybe make a few of these little guys. I found the best way over the years to get rid of scraps is to batch out a bunch of smaller projects. So I made it easier myself and made up some templates so I could just trace it from piece to piece. I roughed out the template shape on the bandsaw and then took it to the spindle sander to refine it. With my template done, it was time to move on to the stock, which meant a whole lot of ripping things down from this massive piece of ash wood that I had left over. For some reason, my bandsaw kept on wanting to follow the grain of this piece, so I ended up having to jump back and forth between the bandsaw and the jointer, the table saw, and the planer. But eventually, I got it down to basically about 3 inches by 1 inch sections. With my stock now cut down into the blanks that I needed, it was the easiest part of the entire project. Just tracing. The only thing I had to pay attention to was that some of the pieces actually needed multiples. I was going to be making trivets out of some of these, so I actually needed 4 of each in order to make up one piece. I started each board by tracing out the larger pieces, and just used the smaller ones as fillers. It didn't matter how many or how few of the smaller pieces I had, just as long as the larger pieces were multiples of 4 in the end. I find doing it this way you end up with very little scrap by the time you're done. Once I had all those traced out and I knew that all my numbers were right, the bandsaw and I became very good friends for quite a few hours. I suggest if you're going to try this out at home, you can wear some very comfortable shoes. I wonder if I can get a seat for the bandsaw. Next step, sanding. Again, comfortable shoes, debating about a seat, and although I had the dust collection going, definitely should have been wearing a mask for this part. I was here for a long time. A 1-inch belt sander would have made this next part a lot easier, getting into all these tight little corners on the bones. But the number one thing you should learn about woodworking is use what tools you have. You can always find a way. Once all the bandsaw marks were done, I sanded this down to 150, 220, and then hand sanded it all the way to 320. What I should have done before doing that is to round over all the edges, especially since my router bit decided to burn every single edge I used it on. So I ended up having to resand all my edges and then rebuff the pieces. Lesson learned. But I did try out a nifty little trick I'd seen on Instagram. Someone I saw didn't actually have a router table, so they just put their little router into a vise. Now, I have a router table, but it would mean that I would have to stand there, and I've been standing for a while now with this project. I don't feel like it. So I took my little router and put it in the vise, and not only was it easier because I could sit there, but it was also safer because it was a much smaller piece that I would want to use on the big router table. Once I'd finished with the router and I'd fixed all the burn marks from it, it was time to drill holes at all these little guys. Now the door stops just needed holes for the eyes, and then they were finished. And again, as much repeatable as I possibly could, so once I figured out where I wanted the holes for these guys, I actually drew a template onto my board, and then it just had to place them in there. When it came to the trivets, I needed holes to run through all of these because they were going to be strung together. So I lined up the first one to figure out about where I'd want the holes to be, and then put marks on it. I tried to drill these kind of freehand on the drill press and eventually gave up and built a temporary fence to hold these things nice and square. When the bones were being drilled, they made full contact with the table of the drill press, so that prevented tear out on them. But the fish, with their curved tails, needed support in order to be drilled out. So I ended up keeping a piece of the cutoffs so that I could use it to support the pieces. It prevented tear out really well. It also helped to hold the piece straight up and down when it was sitting in the drill press. Okay, so these guys have been milled, traced, cut out, sanded way more than I want to admit, routered, sanded again, drilled out. Now they're ready for finish. Once again, I'm sitting down because I'm tired of standing. After 2 coats of finish had dried, I started in on the part where I didn't really know how I was going to pull this off. I've been working off of the picture, so there wasn't really any instructions as to how to tie all these little beads together. But after some trial and error and getting some ideas from my dad, came up with a brilliant idea of using little dowels to hold it all together. So, from start to finish, this is how we strung them. Collect up all your trivet pieces. Then prepare your string by putting a piece of tape on it so that it's stiff enough to be strung through all of your boards. Once you have that, you alternate between bead and trivet piece. And here's a hint: if you're looking for wooden beads and you can't find any, go to the secondhand store and get a necklace made of wooden beads. A lot cheaper than buying them at the craft store. Once you have them all strung from one side to the other, at the end bead you actually loop the string back through to create a bit of a knot. Do the same thing on the other end, and then put a dab of glue and a tiny piece of dowel inside. May take a little bit of hammering. And once the glue dries, you have a trivet that will not come apart. And I didn't actually have to tie a knot to try and do it. After that, just repeat the same steps on the other side. And once you've done that, the only thing left are the beauty shots. These guys are now all ready for use, enjoyment, sale, and not in my shop. For more Wood Chips Liz videos, click some of the links here. I got shop upgrades and projects, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.